You know, there's this feeling you get when you're looking at a piece of software or maybe like an app on your phone, and the user interface is just, well, it's completely
Oh
flawless.
yeah, totally sleek.
Right. The buttons are sleek, the animations are smooth, everything clicks exactly how it's supposed to.
Looks perfect on the screen.
Exactly. But if you were to actually sit down and talk to the software engineers who built it, they would tell you that the back end code is an absolute nightmare.
This is completely broken.
Yeah, it's this tangled web of like quick fixes and duct tape and what they call tech debt and one wrong input, and the entire system will just crash. Even though, like you said, it looks beautiful on the screen.
That is, honestly, that's a brilliant way to frame the problem. Because that hidden fragility, that's exactly how human systems operate.
Oh, 100%.
The presentation layer is perfectly intact, but the structural integrity is quietly failing in the background.
And we experience this all the time in our own lives, right? In the communities we belong to.
Oh, everywhere.
Think about your workplace or a neighborhood association or, maybe even your own extended family. On the outside, the presentation layer is perfect.
Right. Everyone shows up.
Yeah, the weekly meetings happen on schedule, the holiday parties are catered, the corporate emails go out with like all the right buzzwords. But on the inside, the whole thing feels like it's quietly falling apart.
The people are just exhausted.
Exhausted, cynical, and just completely disconnected from each other.
And measuring that quiet collapse is incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, you can audit a budget,
Right.
and you can track attendance.
Sure, you can look at the numbers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you cannot easily quantify a loss of trust or, a creeping sense of alienation. So when the institutions are ostensibly functioning, we just tend to assume the community is healthy.
Which is really the universal human experience we are unpacking today. Because we've all been part of a group that is just going through the motions. And you're just wondering, how did the back end code get so corrupted?
And how do you fix it?
Right, exactly. How do you actually rewrite it? Which brings us to our source material for this deep dive.
Yes, let's get into it.
We are looking at a highly comprehensive essay today. It includes a series of really detailed conceptual diagrams, and it's titled Rebuilding the Community, The People Are Reformed by Chris R. Velazquez.
Yeah, and the author tackles this very modern, deeply human problem of societal breakdown. But, and this is key, they do it through a highly specific historical and theological lens.
Right. It's a dense and incredibly methodical piece of work.
It really is.
And I want to set the framework for you right out of the gate, just so you know exactly what we're looking at. This text is an explicitly biblical and theological exploration of how communities fracture and how they heal.
Yes, it traces the grand narrative of the biblical text.
Exactly. It's rooted in Christian theology. But our goal today is to impartially map out this framework because the mechanics of community failure and restoration that the author identifies here, they are universally applicable.
Oh, absolutely.
Whether you share the author's faith or you practice a different faith, or honestly, if you are approaching this purely from a secular sociological standpoint.
Like an HR director.
Yeah. Maybe you're an HR director trying to fix a toxic office. The blueprint the author outlines is still deeply relevant. We're going to look closely at how this text defines true community renewal, completely regardless of your personal background.
Because the patterns identified in the essay, like the tendency for human beings to rely on outward structures, or the absolute necessity of shared memory,
Right.
or even the hidden dangers of maintaining a false peace. These are dynamics that dictate the survival of every human organization. I mean, from a multinational corporation to a local book club.
A local book club, yeah. It scales perfectly.
So we are treating this text as essentially a diagnostic tool for understanding the core nature of human cohesion.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission today is to trace the author's grand narrative and really extract the specific diagrammed steps for how a scattered, divided, cynical group of people can be rebuilt from the inside out.
Let's do it.
And the author's core thesis really sets the stage immediately. They argue that a community can absolutely survive outwardly while completely collapsing inwardly.
Which goes back to the tech debt.
Exactly. The text explicitly states, I have the quote here, walls may stand, institutions may function, religious language may continue, and yet the people themselves may be disordered, cynical, divided, spiritually dull, and morally compromised.
Wow. And that distinction really challenges our default metrics for success. Because if we go back to your debt analogy, we usually measure the health of a community by checking the user interface.
Right, like is the building standing?
Yeah, exactly. Are the quarterly profits up? The author is drawing a hard line between institutional survival and actual communal health. They're just not the same thing.
But, that raises a massive question about the value of the structures themselves. Well, if the user interface is just masking the broken code, is the author arguing that the outward structures, like the rules, the meetings, the bylaws, the physical buildings, are they just totally irrelevant? Like, should we just scrap the employee handbook and the HR department entirely?
No, no. The text is very careful to avoid that extreme. The author doesn't claim structures are irrelevant, and they actually point to the historical figure of Nehemiah to prove it.
Okay.
So Nehemiah literally led the physical rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem after they were destroyed by an invading empire. And the text acknowledges those walls were necessary for survival.
They needed the physical boundary.
Right. But it introduces this vital caveat. It says, Nehemiah's walls were important, but walls alone do not produce holiness.
Walls alone do not produce holiness. That is a great phrase. And the text also brings in Ezra, right? Who instituted the reading of the law, basically the rules.
Yes.
But the author notes that scripture without obedience becomes noise.
Exactly. And that introduces this concept of the hierarchy of renewal. Rebuilding a community in this framework is not fundamentally a social project or even an administrative puzzle.
Okay, what is it then?
It's a redemptive act. It has to happen at the level of identity, allegiance, and what the people actually worship. You can construct the strongest physical walls or write the most robust corporate bylaws.
But if the people are a mess...
Right. If the people operating within those boundaries are fundamentally selfish, competitive, and divided, the community remains broken.
That completely subverts how we usually try to fix things, doesn't it? I mean, when a team at work is completely dysfunctional, management doesn't usually come in and say, we need a deep reformation of our core identities.
No, they definitely do not say that.
Right. They say, we need a new project management software, or we need to reorganize the reporting structure. We always try to fix the internal rot with better logistics.
We do. And that logistical approach almost always fails to produce lasting cohesion. The author is arguing that the fix must be a heart-level reformation.
It has to go deeper.
Yes, rebuilding requires restoring relationships, which the text actually categorizes on two axes, vertically referring to humanity's relationship with God, and horizontally referring to humanity's relationship with one another.
Okay.
So if the people themselves are not fundamentally reshaped on both those axes, any structural change is just rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship.
Rearranging the deck chairs.
Yeah.
The phrase the text uses is inside-out renewal. It's not about reorganizing public life. It's about altering the fundamental DNA of the people.
That's a good way to put it.
And to understand how to fix this deep systemic tech debt, the author argues we first have to understand how the original code was written. We have to look at the initial blueprint.
Yes, the starting point.
Which takes us into the author's grand chronological narrative of community, which literally begins before time itself.
It does. The historical arc the essay builds is massive. It begins with eternity and moves right into creation. And the core philosophical argument here is that community is not an afterthought.
It wasn't just a survival mechanism.
Exactly. It wasn't invented by early humans simply because, hunting in a pack was a more efficient way to survive. According to this theological framework, relationality is baked into the very design of reality.
The essay points out that human beings are made in an image that is inherently relational. The text says, Adam is not made to live as a self-enclosed unit.
Right.
And just think about how radically that opposes the hyper-individualistic messaging of modern culture.
Completely.
We are constantly conditioned to believe that ultimate success means being completely self-sufficient, completely independent, like you need absolutely no one.
The lone wolf ideal.
Right. But this blueprint asserts that you were designed to be connected.
What's fascinating here is how the author roots this human design in the nature of God. The text examines that phrase from Genesis, let us make man in our image.
The us part.
Yes. The author interprets this plural us as evidence of a non-solitary divine life. So before humanity, before the physical universe even existed, there was a relationship within the divine nature.
Wow.
Therefore, when humans are created, their need for social connection, partnership, and shared stewardship isn't a weakness. It's actually a reflection of that divine reality. Community is, as the text says, part of the grain of reality.
Meaning, if you try to live as an isolated, self-enclosed unit, you aren't just being antisocial, you are actually grinding against the fundamental physics of how the universe was constructed.
You're fighting the design.
Right.
Ah.
But obviously, we look around today, and perfect relational harmony is, well, it's not the reality we experience, which shifts the narrative to the fracture of that design, which is the fall.
The fall, yes. And the author is highly explicit about the mechanics of this fracture. When sin enters the narrative, the immediate consequence is not just a broken legal statute.
Right.
The fallout is profoundly relational.
Yeah, the first human reaction isn't to, like, ask for a lighter sentence. The reaction is shame, hiding, and blame.
Exactly.
Adam and Eve hide from their creator, and then they immediately begin turning on each other. The relational fabric just tears instantly.
And that initial tear quickly spirals outward. The text traces it from interpersonal hiding to the very first murder with Cain and Abel.
Oh, right.
And then it eventually expands into systemic violence, cultural pride, and tribal warfare. The loss of the vertical relationship inherently destroys the horizontal relationship.
And that progression brings up a really compelling part of the essay, the mention of Babel.
Yes, the Tower of Babel.
The author describes Babel as humanity's attempt at achieving unity without any submission to a higher authority. It is defined as a, quote, false community built on pride and self-exaltation.
That's such a striking definition.
When I read that description, it immediately sounded to me like modern hustle culture.
Oh, that is a great connection. The parallels are striking.
Right.
The psychological driver is identical.
Right. Like, think about a high-end networking event or one of those massive industry conferences.
I've been to a few of those.
We all have. You walk into a room of 500 people, and supposedly this is a community of driven, like-minded innovators.
We're all in this together.
Exactly. But the reality is highly transactional. Everyone is shaking your hand while simultaneously looking over your shoulder to see if there is someone with a higher network they could be talking to.
Looking for an upgrade?
Always. People are gathering together purely to elevate their own status. They are essentially building their own individual towers. And inevitably, that kind of environment breeds intense paranoia.
Oh, the competition is fierce.
Competition division.
Yeah.
Because your success is fundamentally a threat to my success.
And that perfectly illustrates the author's critique of Babel. Any attempt to build unity solely on human pride or shared ambition or self-exaltation, it contains the seeds of its own destruction.
It can't last.
No. People can live in close physical proximity, they can work in the same corporate headquarters and still be entirely divided spiritually and relationally. The author makes a definitive statement here. They say, the Bible never idealizes group life apart from holiness.
Wow.
Mere proximity or shared ambition just does not guarantee inward fidelity.
So, if human attempts to build a community through mutual ambition always end in a fractured transactional mess, what is the alternative? Like, how do you forge a group of people who actually stick together when human nature defaults to hiding, blaming, and competing?
Right. What's the solution?
Yeah. And the author introduces a concept here that serves as the antidote to transaction, and that is covenant.
Covenant. This is a critical juncture where the theological framework really diverges sharply from a standard sociological model.
How so?
Well, the text argues that God's solution to a fragmented humanity is not to rescue a collection of isolated individuals, but to form a distinct people.
A collective.
Yes, and the binding agent for this people is not shared ethnicity or cultural preferences or military force. The binding agent is covenant grace.
To put that in a secular context, we usually form groups based on similarity. We find people who listen to the same music or vote for the same political party or have the same socioeconomic background.
Right, affinity groups.
Exactly. We build our communities on shared tastes. But a covenant is fundamentally different. It's an unconditional mutual obligation. The text insists that biblical community is not defined by identity politics or preferences. It is defined by a shared promise that supersedes all those cultural markers.
And that shared promise is anchored by a shared memory.
A shared memory. I love this part.
It's so powerful. The narrative moves to the Exodus, where God delivers the Israelites from bondage in Egypt. This historical event creates the psychological and theological foundation of the community.
Okay.
The author writes that their core identity becomes this shared narrative. Simply, we were slaves, and God brought us out.
And the psychological mechanism of that shared memory is fascinating. The essay explains that remembering this specific kind of grace produces humility, gratitude, and solidarity.
Think about it. If we examine why communities typically fracture, the root cause is almost always arrogance.
Yes.
Specific individuals or subgroups within the organization begin to believe they are inherently more valuable or more talented or more deserving than the rest. A hierarchy of worth develops.
Right, people start looking down on each other.
But if your foundational unifying identity is the shared memory that we were all equally helpless, we were all in bondage, and we were all rescued by an outside force, that completely neutralizes the space where arrogance usually grows.
It's a leveler.
Exactly. The shared memory acts as a permanent societal equalizer.
It levels the playing field entirely. And the text explicitly warns that when a redeemed people forget that memory, when they lose the narrative of their own rescue, they immediately become arrogant and fragmented.
They start dividing into factions.
Yeah, based on wealth or status, completely ignoring the fact that they didn't earn their freedom to begin with.
And that tendency to forget the shared memory sets up the next phase in the author's timeline, which is the kingdom era, focusing on the reigns of figures like David and Solomon.
Okay, so they have kings now.
Right. This represents a period where the community attempts to sustain itself under ordered human authority and administration.
And the essay admits that under righteous, competent rule, a community can experience a golden age. You get justice, economic stability, and strong institutional boundaries. But, and this is a big but, the author places a massive warning label on this era, noting that community under human rule is incredibly fragile.
The text is unambiguous here. It says, when kings become self-serving, the people fracture.
Okay, I want to push back on the author's logic for a second here.
Go for it.
If righteous leadership creates such a flourishing community, why is the design considered inherently flawed or fragile? Like, if a company has an amazing, highly ethical CEO, shouldn't that organization thrive long-term? Why does the text view human administration with such skepticism?
Because the text identifies the fundamental limitation of bureaucracy. The fragility is not a bug in the system. It is the defining feature of human administration.
Okay, unpack that for me.
A king or a CEO can enforce compliance. They can build infrastructure, write equitable laws, and mandate a peaceful user interface.
Yeah.
But they cannot change the internal motivations of the people.
Right.
The author argues, the community needs more than administration. It needs heart reformation. When the leader inevitably fails, or simply retires, the outward structures immediately collapse because the internal rot was never actually cured.
Ah, so the tech debt is still there. The competent CEO just managed to keep the servers running, but the code itself is still garbage.
Exactly. You cannot legislate a healthy corporate culture into existence.
You can mandate diversity training or weekly team-building exercises, but you can't force people to actually trust each other.
Precisely. The failure of the kingdom era in the biblical narrative demonstrates that top-down administrative power is insufficient to sustain true community.
Which leads to the most catastrophic event in the text's historical timeline, the exile.
The total loss of everything outward.
Yeah, the physical walls of Jerusalem are destroyed, the temple is gone, the political institutions are dismantled, and the people are dragged off to Babylon. From a purely administrative standpoint, the community is dead.
It's over.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Because the essay delivers its most counterintuitive insight right here. The author argues that this absolute devastation, this exile, actually becomes the crucible where true community is forged.
It is a profound sociological observation. Think about it. When you strip away the buildings, the branding, the budget, and the political power, what is left?
Not much on the surface.
Right. The author uses Daniel and his companions in Babylon as the prototype of the remnant community. They are living in a hostile foreign culture. They have no geographical borders, no temple to gather in, and no king to enforce their laws.
But they don't assimilate, and they don't fracture. The text points out that they maintain a distinct, unified community through internalized practices like prayer, confession, dietary distinctiveness, and courageous witness.
They hold on to their identity.
Right. And you know, it makes me think of the life cycle of modern tech startups.
Oh, how so?
Think about a startup company when it's just like 5 people working out of a cramped, unheated garage.
Classic origin story.
Right. They have no money, no brand recognition, and terrible working conditions. But the sense of community, the shared mission, and the deep mutual reliance is incredibly strong. They are essentially in a state of corporate exile.
I see where you're going with this.
Then they get massively funded. They move into a billion-dollar campus in Silicon Valley with, you know, catered lunches and nap pods.
The outward success.
Exactly. And suddenly the politics start, the silos form, the backstabbing begins, and the culture completely fractures. The outward markers of success actually destroyed the internal cohesion they had in the garage?
That dynamic maps perfectly onto the author's argument. The exile forces the community to internalize their identity. It proves that covenant fidelity is not reducible to geography or institutional wealth. The community in Babylon survives because their shared commitment to their core beliefs is stronger than the external pressure of the empire. They are reconstituted not by power, but by faithfulness.
And that crucible of faithfulness sets the stage for the practical mechanics of how you actually rebuild. When the historical exile ends and the people return to the rubble of Jerusalem, they don't just start throwing up bricks randomly.
No, they don't.
The essay uses the figures of Ezra and Nehemiah to diagram a very specific 6-step blueprint for inside-out restoration. And this is the operational core of the entire text. So we really need to look at how these steps function psychologically and sociologically.
We do. And the sequence of these steps is highly intentional.
Right, you can't just skip around.
No, you can't. So step one is hear the word. The narrative describes Ezra publicly reading the law to the returned exiles, and their immediate response is to weep.
They realize how far they've drifted?
Exactly. They realize how far they've drifted from their foundational identity. And the sociological mechanism here is that true renewal must begin with objective revelation, not subjective self-invention.
Meaning you can't just get the executive team in a conference room with a whiteboard and brainstorm a new list of corporate values.
No, that won't work.
You have to anchor the community to a foundational truth that exists outside of their own preferences.
If the standard is just whatever the group decides in the moment, the standard will always shift to accommodate the group's dysfunction.
Which makes step 2 the most psychologically difficult. Confess the sin.
This is a tough one.
Very tough. The text describes Nehemiah leading a corporate confession. And the author drops an incredibly sharp insight here. They say, denial protects dysfunction, confession opens the door to healing.
We really have to analyze the corporate instinct for denial here.
Yeah, let's dig into that.
Because in almost any broken organization, the primary goal of leadership is reputation management.
Oh, always.
When a failure occurs, the language used is always passive and defensive. Mistakes were made, or we regret if anyone felt alienated.
The classic non-apology apology.
Right. That kind of passive voice acts as a shield. It protects the toxic behavior from actual scrutiny. The author is arguing that until a community can corporately, explicitly name its failures without caveat or defense, it cannot rebuild.
It's the difference between a family saying, we've had some tense holidays, and a family saying, we have a generational pattern of emotional abuse, and we are acknowledging the damage it has caused.
Exactly. The confession dismantles the defensive posturing. It creates psychological safety by admitting the reality everyone is already experiencing but is just too afraid to name.
And once that reality is named, you move to step 3. Separate from evil.
Yes.
This involves the active removal of ungodly practices, corrupt alliances, and toxic behaviors. And the theological principle the author ties to this is that holiness protects community.
This is a really crucial point in the framework.
I actually really want to challenge this step on behalf of the modern listener, because this is where the framework creates massive friction with contemporary culture.
Oh, I'm sure it does. Go ahead.
Focusing on separation, boundaries, and discipline sounds incredibly harsh. I mean, in our current cultural moment, we tend to define love as the unconditional inclusion of absolutely every behavior or viewpoint.
Right. Inclusivity is the ultimate virtue.
Exactly. So the idea of separating or excluding anything feels judgmental and anti-community. Modern listeners might hate that.
The author actually anticipates that exact friction, and the logic they provide is crucial.
Let's hear it.
The text states, community without holiness becomes sentimentality or chaos. Love without truth cannot endure.
Calling inclusivity without boundaries sentimentality or chaos is a heavy indictment.
It is. But we can understand the mechanism by looking at the human body.
Okay.
Think about an immune system. Its primary function is to identify and separate from pathogens. It maintains boundaries. If the immune system suddenly decides to be unconditionally inclusive of every virus and bacteria that enters the bloodstream, the body dies.
Wow. Okay, I see that.
The author views these moral and covenantal boundaries not as oppressive, spiteful walls meant to keep people out, but as essential guardrails that sustain actual justice, safety, and love within the community.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it makes a lot of sense. So if an organization's core value is transparency and an executive is caught embezzling and lying, Firing that executive, separating from the toxic behavior, is the only way to protect the trust of the other employees.
Yes.
If you tolerate the corruption in the name of being inclusive or avoiding conflict, you are actually destroying the safety of the community from the inside.
Exactly. Holiness or structural integrity is the protective shell that allows true vulnerability to exist. Without boundaries, the most predatory or toxic elements will always consume the community.
That reframes the concept entirely. It's about protecting the ecosystem.
It is.
That leads right into step 4, which is reform daily life. The text states that this reform isn't just an abstract spiritual feeling. It touches the most practical elements of existence.
Reestablishing the Sabbath, changing how people handle their money.
Yeah, reforming marriages and demanding justice for the vulnerable. It touches everything.
It's a total lifestyle overhaul. It proves the Reformation has moved from the theoretical into the economic and the relational. If your theology doesn't change how you treat your employees or how you spend your time, it isn't an actual reformation.
Right, it has to hit the ground. And step 5 is to recommit to covenant. The people in the narrative literally sign a written pledge of obedience. They draw a line in the sand and make a formal, shared commitment to this new structural integrity.
This step is what transitions the community out of the initial emotional catharsis of confession. It locks the new behaviors into a binding long-term structure.
It creates a new baseline for accountability. And then finally, we reach step 6, rebuild together. The text emphasizes that the actual physical rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem happens after the internal reformation has taken root. The unity is cemented through shared labor.
It is a masterful, sociologically sound progression.
It really is.
Think about the flow. You establish the objective truth. You dismantle the defensive denial. You surgically remove the toxicity. You alter your daily habits. You lock in the accountability. And then you apply that renewed internal health to a shared external project.
It is an incredibly lucid operational manual. But the essay makes a critical pivot here.
Yes, it does.
Because as effective as Ezra and Nehemiah's 6-step process was, the author points out that it was merely a historical preview. They rebuilt the physical city and they reformed the people for a generation. But it wasn't a permanent cure for human nature.
The community eventually fractured again.
Exactly. So in this theological framework, who accomplishes the ultimate, lasting, inside-out rebuild?
This is where the narrative transitions into the New Testament. And it centers entirely on the person and work of the Messiah. The author posits that Jesus doesn't arrive merely to dispense individual salvation tickets to heaven.
Right.
He arrives to gather a people. He forms renewed Israel, a completely new covenant community.
The essay points specifically to the crucifixion here, citing Ephesians chapter 2. It argues that the cross destroys the dividing wall of hostility.
Yes.
It dismantles the ancient, seemingly insurmountable enmities between groups. Jews and Gentiles, slaves and free citizens, male and female. It absorbs that hostility and brings those fractured groups into one unified body.
But the author introduces a vital dose of realism here. They are very careful not to present this new community, the New Testament church, as an instant, flawless utopia.
It's not magic.
No. The text describes this new community, birthed at Pentecost, as spirit-filled, but also explicitly labels it as holy but unfinished.
Holy but unfinished. That tension is incredibly relatable. It acknowledges that progress has been made, but perfection hasn't been achieved.
The author points to the early churches in places like Corinth and Galatia to illustrate this.
Okay, what were they dealing with?
Well, the Corinthian community had incredible spiritual gifts and energy, but they were deeply divided by ego, classism, and immaturity.
Sound familiar?
Very. And the Galatian community had immense zeal, but they quickly lost clarity on the core message of grace they were founded upon. The text argues that the New Testament community, much like post-exilic Israel, must be continually cyclically reformed by the Word.
It's not a software patch you install once and forget about.
Exactly.
Because human nature constantly exerts a gravitational pull back toward pride, tribalism, and transaction. The community has to constantly run those 6 steps of Ezra and Nehemiah over and over again. We keep drifting, so we have to keep confessing and reforming.
It's an ongoing process.
Which explains why the essay's narrative pushes all the way forward to the ultimate destination, judgment to eternity. And the author's description of this final state is really illuminating. They point to the vision of the New Jerusalem found in Revelation chapters 21 and 22.
And what stands out here is the specific contrast the author draws regarding the nature of the afterlife. They explicitly state that the New Jerusalem is not an atomized heaven of private bliss.
Let's sit with that for a second, because modern pop culture has deeply distorted our view of this.
Oh, without doubt.
When people picture heaven, they usually picture an individual sitting on a personal, fluffy cloud, playing a harp in total isolation.
Just me and my cloud.
Right. It is a projection of absolute, undisturbed, private peace, completely disconnected from the annoyance of other people.
But the biblical vision, as the author highlights, is the exact opposite of isolation. It is a perfected city.
A city.
Yes. The imagery of a city inherently implies structure, intense relational interaction, shared economy, and communal life. The ultimate culmination of human existence is a perfected communal dwelling where God resides directly with a unified people.
And the author doesn't just include this as a piece of theological trivia. They explain exactly why this future vision dictates our present sociology.
And what matters now?
Yes. The text argues that the painful, exhausting work of rebuilding a community on Earth, doing the confession, having the hard conversations, removing the toxicity, isn't just a pragmatic strategy to make your office or your neighborhood function a little better for the next decade.
Right. It is meant to be a literal preview. The author uses the word foretaste.
Oh, foretaste.
Yes. When a community on Earth actually functions according to its original design, when it operates with truth, unconditional love, boundaries, and grace, it provides the watching world with a tangible, structural glimpse of what that eternal city will look like.
It elevates the stakes of conflict resolution from mere HR management to a profound theological witness.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have traced the grand narrative from the blueprint of creation to the ultimate vision of the eternal city. We've explored the historical mechanics of exile and restoration. But the most valuable part of this essay might be the final section.
The practical applications.
Exactly. Where the author brings all of this massive theology down to the ground, they outline the practical applications, and crucially, they identify the specific pitfalls and red flags that indicate we are building a false community. Let's dig into these misunderstandings, because they happen every day in almost every organization.
The first danger the text identifies is treating community merely as emotional belonging.
This is an epidemic in modern networking and socializing. We define community as finding a group of people who make us feel warm, validated, and comfortable.
We just want to be affirmed.
Right. We want an echo chamber that agrees with us and never challenges our blind spots. But the author argues that true biblical community requires covenant responsibility, which includes difficult truth and mutual correction.
It's not just a feeling.
No, it's not just a shared feeling of belonging. It is a shared obligation to each other's growth.
The second pitfall relates directly to our early discussion about tech debt. The danger of rebuilding outward structures while neglecting the heart.
We see this all the time.
You can hire the best consultants, rebrand the organization, balance the budget, and rewrite the bylaws. But if the people remain selfish and cynical, the community is still spiritually and relationally bankrupt.
The third danger is assuming renewal can happen without repentance. This ties back to the confession step. So many groups try to move forward without ever dealing with the past.
Just sweep it under the rug.
Exactly. The text warns that reformation without repentance is cosmetic. You are just putting a Band-Aid over a deeply infected wound. It might look better for a minute, but the infection will eventually spread.
And that leads to the fourth and perhaps most insidious danger the author highlights, the danger of false peace. The text explicitly warns against the human tendency of equating unity with avoidance of truth.
We have to spend some time here, because this is the default setting for almost every tense environment.
It really is.
Whether it's a corporate leadership team that has been subtly undermining each other for years, or an extended family that sits down for Thanksgiving dinner with a massive unspoken grievance hanging in the air.
Just pass the potatoes.
Right. The overwhelming instinct is to just keep quiet. We think, if nobody is actively yelling, we have achieved unity, let's just keep the peace. But the text says, not every quiet church is healthy. Why is avoidance so destructive to the fabric of a community?
Because avoidance is not healing. It is merely postponing the inevitable fracture. The author states beautifully, true unity is not silence, it is truth held in love.
Truth held in love.
When you avoid addressing a fundamental breach of trust in order to keep the peace, you are actually prioritizing your own emotional comfort over the structural health of the relationship.
Oh, wow. That's a hard truth.
In the silence of avoidance, resentment ferments. The dysfunction continues to operate in the shadows, growing stronger because it is protected by the unspoken agreement not to address it.
The author places a massive burden on leadership regarding this issue. They argue that leaders must actively resist the temptation of superficial peace. A leader must have the courage to initiate the difficult, awkward conversations, to establish clear boundaries, and to offer courageous correction when the covenant is breached.
But the text immediately adds a vital caveat to how those hard conversations must be handled. They say, it must always be done for restoration, not domination.
And that is the dividing line between healthy leadership and toxic authoritarianism.
Is
The goal of the confrontation isn't to win the argument, to humiliate the other person, or to assert your dominance. The sole objective is to rescue the relationship and restore the integrity of the community.
which requires an immense amount of humility and a deep, self-sacrificial commitment to the other person's well-being. It is the most exhausting, difficult work a human being can engage in, which is exactly why we so often settle for the false, fragile peace of silence.
So, how does this framework practically apply to the listener's daily life? The author breaks this down into several specific spheres of influence. For churches or religious ministries, the advice is blunt and uncompromising.
Very blunt.
Stop relying on corporate branding, cultural trendiness, or the sheer charisma of a single leader. Real renewal requires a hard return to objective scripture, deep corporate repentance, and a shared mission that outlasts the leader.
For families, the implications really challenge the way we organize our homes. The text argues that households need to be ordered around mutual forgiveness, truthful communication, and a shared anchor in God's Word, rather than just trying to implement better logistics.
You cannot schedule your way out of a broken family dynamic.
No, you can't.
A shared digital calendar will not fix a lack of grace in a marriage. You have to reform the hearts involved.
In the realm of discipleship or personal growth, the author stresses that formation is inherently communal. You cannot be an isolated consumer of religious content.
Meaning you can't just listen to hours of podcasts.
For deep dives.
Right. You can't just read theology books alone in your room and assume you are growing. You have to be deeply embedded in a physical people whose habits, conflicts, and loves are shaping you in real time.
And finally, the text addresses the concept of mission. Why undergo all this painful, exhausting work of internal reformation? Because a reformed community becomes a missionary sign.
A missionary sign.
Yes. When the outside world, a world that is currently suffocating in transactional relationships, cynicism, and atomized isolation, looks at a group of people who actually bear each other's burdens, who actually confess their failures and forgive deep offenses, who honor objective truth without losing radical love.
They see something totally different.
We are seeing a preview of a different kingdom. The existence of the community itself is the most powerful argument for the truth they claim to believe.
So, what does this all mean for us? As we bring all the threads of this deep dive together, the overarching message of Chris R. Velasquez's work is piercingly clear. Whether you are a secular manager trying to fix a toxic corporate culture, or you are looking through this text's theological lens trying to renew a fractured local church, the core principle remains identical. You cannot rebuild a community from the outside in.
The structural approach alone is fundamentally inadequate.
Outward walls, revised rules, inherited customs, sleeker branding, and sharper logistics, none of it is sufficient. True rebuilding requires the difficult, ego-destroying work of honest confession. It requires a shared and unshakable anchor in objective truth, a willingness to separate from toxic behaviors, and a total, inside-out, heart-level reformation. You have to address the broken code in the back end before you polish the user interface.
It is a demanding, rigorous blueprint that offers no shortcuts, but it is also a profoundly hopeful one, because it insists that no matter how scattered, damaged, or cynical a group of people has become, even if they are in the depths of a cultural exile, restoration is always possible if they are willing to do the deep, inward work of covenant renewal.
And as we wrap up this deep dive into the source material, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on a concept the author introduced when analyzing the Exodus. We talked about how ancient Israel's community was sustained by the psychological equalizer of a shared memory.
Remembering they were all rescued.
Right. Remembering that they were all rescued from bondage, prevented arrogance, and kept them structurally united.
This raises an essential question for you to consider regarding your own life. Think about the specific communities you are embedded in right now. Your workplace, your extended family, your neighborhood association, your church. What is the shared memory that is currently holding your group together?
Is it a healthy memory?
Exactly. Is your community united by a shared grievance against a rival department? Is it united merely by a shared financial goal? Or is it anchored by something deeper and more resilient? If your community fractured completely tomorrow, what shared truth, what foundational memory would you need to remember in order to rebuild it from the inside out?
It's a question that forces you to examine the very foundation of the house you are living in. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into rebuilding the community. We hope this conversation has provided you with some new diagnostic tools to understand the dynamics, the failures, and the potential of the groups you are a part of. Keep exploring the mechanisms of the world around you, keep asking the hard questions, and we will see you on the next deep dive.